What am I doing? Unique New York. Me. Just warming up. The Human Torch was denied a bank loan. Okay. Greetings, everyone. How's everybody doing? First off, welcome to my new office/studio here in Houston, Texas. So this is the new home of all the old head bullshit. And so let's just jump right into it. It's time for another album versus album. So last time I promised you that I had a pretty good one and we were going to get back into the metal. And as you can see behind me, it's a pretty tough one. This week's album versus album, this time's album versus album is two Sepultura classics battling each other to the death, I don't know, whatever, to the lesser of the two, who cares? Anyway, this is the battle of Beneath the Remains and Arise. Let's talk about these albums. First off, let's talk about Beneath the Remains. This was the third Sepultura album, came out in 1989. It was produced by Scott Burns, the legendary Scott Burns, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And honestly, as much as I do really like the first two Sepultura albums, this is the first one where I think the album production is as good as the songs. And the band themselves are fucking amazing on this. They're just so tight. They're so locked in with each other from the get-go. Just once the title track really kicks in, I mean, this is a classic thrash band to be reckoned with. And there's pretty much nothing but classic thrash metal at its best on this album. Not only do you have the speed and the riffs like, Beneath the Remains, but also Inner Self. It brings in a lot of that sort of mid-tempo mosh riff kind of shit that Sepultura was so good at. And not only that they don't really stick to any sort of template or song structure, because if you listen to a song like Inner Self, it's got all these different parts to it, but the first verse, which is more of a mid-tempo thing, the last verse is more of a galloping fast beat, and so it just feels like these songs just sort of became whatever they became, and they really weren't worried about what it was going to be, and it just turned out being fucking amazing. My favorite track on this album is Mass Hypnosis, which, like many of the tracks on this album, has a very epic quality to it. These guys put a lot of fucking effort into the songwriting and performances on this album. I could spend an hour talking about each and every song on this album and why each one is individually really fucking great, because each one has so many killer different parts to talk about. And honestly, Sepultura was the first band that I started to really notice sort of dissonant guitar parts and kind of odd time signatures and shifts. Before that, I don't think that it had really come across as that noticeable, because Sepultura just do it so well. So honestly, there's not a misstep on this album. When I just listened to it again, it just reconfirmed that for me. There is not a dull moment. This is a pretty fucking perfect album. I mean, maybe you could say that Primitive Future is kind of a weak song, but that's only comparing it to all the other songs on this album. But yeah, overall, Beneath the Remains, pretty goddamn perfect thrash metal album. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk about Arise. Arise was released in 1991, also produced by Scott Burns, but this time it was recorded at Morris Sound Studios in Tampa, Florida, which was where Scott Burns produced a lot of fucking classic metal albums. And this was actually my introduction to Sepultura when this album came out. And so it holds a special place in my heart because this was the beginning of my relationship with Sepultura. And there's so many great fucking songs. First off, title track, Arise. it blows my fucking mind even today. It's probably one of my favorite metal songs ever written. But unlike Beneath the Remains, which has a lot of like epic sort of style songs, this album has some of those too, but it also has these really short bursts like Arise. But also, you know, then you go right into Dead Embryonic Cells, which is such an amazingly well-written song. There's so many great parts in that song. And then, you know, Desperate Cry is amazing. So there's a lot on this album that is also equally amazing to Beneath the Remains. But the one thing I would have to say is that you could make the argument that there are improvements from Beneath the Remains. I think the production's probably a little bit better. I think the songs and performances sound a little bit more mature, but that's kind of where it stops for me. I think overall, the songwriting takes a bit of a step down from Beneath the Remains. I saw somebody comment on YouTube that it has a weak second half, and I think that's pretty much true. It starts off really, really strong. Now, mind you, we're talking about Sepultura albums here. This is already better than most metal albums. But when it comes to comparing it to Beneath the Remains, I think the second half of this album doesn't quite hold up as well. Not only that, and this is just a nitpicking thing from me, the song Infected Voice has the exact same notes in the main riff that Arise has. So if you bear with me, but in Arise you have dan 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 dan, and then in Infected Voice you have dan 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 dan. So it's literally, they just took a riff and kind of inverted it and changed it a little bit. It's almost like they had two different versions of the same riff and said, fuck it, let's just write two songs. And on top of that, Infected Voice has the exact same 3-minute, 18-second running time as Arise. That's weird. Can you say template? No, it probably wasn't. Still a fucking great song, but things like that are what kind of holds this album back a little bit for me from Beneath the Remains. But that is just my opinion. As a lot of you know out there, whenever I do these album versus albums, I put out polls on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram. Used to put it on Facebook, but there's not an option there anymore. So if you weren't able to participate this time, make sure you go follow me at Old Head Podcast at Twitter, oldhead.tx on Instagram, whatever. And then Facebook is also Old Head Podcast, I think. But anyway, let's see what the results were this time. So on Instagram, Beneath the Remains wins with 54% of the vote. That is 50 votes for Beneath the Remains and 43 votes for Arise. And then over on YouTube, Arise wins with 53% of the vote. That is 48 votes for Arise and 42 votes for Beneath the Remains. And now Twitter, Beneath the Remains wins with 80% of the vote, but honestly, there was only 5 votes. 4 of them were for Beneath the Remains and 1 was for Arise. And so that brings us to a total of 96 plus 1, 97 for Beneath the Remains and 92 for Arise. Obviously, my vote is for Beneath the Remains. So there you go. The winner of this edition of Album versus Album is Glary Beneath the Remains. I'm still getting the kinks worked out of doing videos in this new studio, so bear with me. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this edition of Album versus Album. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought, what your vote would have been for if you weren't able to vote, and go follow me on the social medias, because next time I'll post those polls and you can be a part of it. Anyway, thank you for joining me for the first ever Old Head video in my new office/studio. And I will be back again before you know it. Bye.